It's 1992. Things are taking a turn. I'm in secondary 2 or year 8, as you might call it. And it's Teacher's Day, which means that we get to wear whatever we wanted instead of school uniforms. Also, students came together to perform for our teachers. But the truth is, we aren't so keen to perform for them per se, but more of the fact that some students get to make a ruckus on stage, the very stage that some of us get public canings.
Frontiers Radio.
You're listening to Frontiers Radio, a podcast for psychotherapists who value deep learning and individualized development. On the show, you acquire cutting-edge knowledge that pushes beyond the edge of your development. Deliberate practice principles are pulled together from the studies of expertise and expert performance in a variety of professional domains, including cognitive sciences about how we learn, behavioral economics, aesthetic arts, and of course, from the front lines of psychotherapy research. It's my job to help you stay at the bleeding edge so that your clients reap the benefits as you become a deep learner. After the performances, during the break, I hear this fuzzy, distorted, menacing noise piercing out of the upper secondary classroom. I took the stairs to the second level, and I see a crowd of students encircling Dione, seated like a modern guru with his guitar, his electric guitar, which was decorated with stickers and loud neon graffiti-like drawings on it. He was playing Metallica's Master of Puppets. My jaw dropped. I couldn't move. Is he really playing it? How does he do that with his fingers? Am I gonna cry? It sounds exactly like in the cassette. That was the day that something in me left childhood behind, and a new era of my life was born. And it was born with the electric guitar. And it was months later that I saved up enough money to buy a second-hand black Yamaha from a friend. Now, you have to know, Dione is untouchable. He's way too cool to teach me. At least that's what I thought. I'm in sheer admiration. Days later, I got to know from another senior boy who's playing his guitar and who's eager to impress. I begged him to teach me the song he tried to show off to me, a Guns N' Roses number called 1 in a Million. It was what guitarists called a bar chord song, a tune that requires you to train your left first finger to hold all 6 strings down at one time, and it would hurt like hell. Even with the classical guitar training that I had 3 years ago that I've given up, I couldn't even string together 3 chords at that stage, let alone play 1 out of 5 bar chords in that song. But the stakes got higher. A few weeks later, I got together with 4 other seniors in my school, and out of naivete and hubris, we formed a band called Hindenburg. Yes, we were big Led Zeppelin fans. I'm the guitarist. We write our first song called Scars, with just 4 chords I've mastered. No bar chords in that song. Story of me and the electric guitar has a point. I hit the jackpot in my undergrad days. In the counseling unit, I've met Dr. Robert Close, and he devised a structure. To this day, I attribute this first lecture that I had with him to such a huge impact on the way I think. Each week, we had about 3 hours with him. He devoted the first hour or so to the landscape of psychotherapy and counseling and its various approaches. After a break, we had another 1 hour or so of conversation, as he would call it. It also happened to be a time in my life I said to myself, I'm not going to be this socially withdrawn person anymore. I decided to be proactive. So, on the first day, Dr. Close asks for 2 volunteers. We had no idea what he had in mind. I raised my hand, along with another student, Candy. Okay, great, he replies. Now, the 2 of you go to this room and chat with each other for a bit. Meanwhile, the rest of us go behind the one-way mirror and observe Candy and Daryl as they talk to each other. What? I had no idea what I signed up for. Candy, thankfully, is much more socially apt than I am. She takes the lead. We ended up chatting about her hair color, about music, and why we both were interested in this field of psychotherapy. Eventually, we did have a blast. Dr. Close brings the class together as the rest of the group comes into this pseudo FBI interrogation room-like. We debrief, we talk about how we talked, we evaluate what it was like to engage with each other. By that time, I was on fire. Throughout the counseling and psychotherapy unit, Dr. Close was quick to emphasize that in spite of the various models of therapy we were about to learn, the evidence was consistent that theoretical orientation accounts for very little in treatment outcome. And this was also the first time I saw references to the work of Michael Lambert, Barry Duncan, Mark Hubble, Scott Miller, and so on. I don't believe my experience in higher education should be considered an outlier. It should be the norm. We should be taking more of what I would call a Kindling model and less of a banking model. And here's what I mean. With learning the guitar and composing music, had a huge impact in the way I thought about how deep learning happens. Turns out, traditional education is oftentimes void of learning that translates. I realized this in the playing in a band part of my life. Lousy as I was in my school grades, learning was possible if I first learned to kindle the flame. And it helped that my mom believed that I was a late bloomer. I discovered that I was not a poor learner. I was just a slow learner. As Plutarch would say more than 2,000 years ago, education is the kindling of a flame, not the filling of a vessel. My education in music ignited, although I had yet to learn any music theory at that stage. Two different ways to think about how we educate and train psychotherapists. The first is a banking model. Traditionally, we teach the theory, study the research evidence, fill in the learner's minds, and attempting to upload into the learner with facts and knowledge. Then about 4 years later, we send them off for practical experience and begin the real work. The banking model works more on a top-down direction. The second way is a kindling model. In this approach, we flip the banking model on its head and start with the action, igniting a deep interest while continuously fanning the flame, and then learning to synthesize, integrate, connect the dots, and form new conscious knowledge after the fact. A kindling model emphasizes more of a bottom-up direction coupled with apprenticeship, guidance over time. It is here that we can learn from people like Sal Khan, who created the Khan Academy, and how he made us rethink how education can look like. It is popularly known now as the flipped classroom. Students can learn about the theories outside of the classroom. And then the classrooms can become less lectures and more of workshop of sorts, aimed to work through challenges, knots that people are stuck in, and kindling the flame. And if you'd like to learn more about Sal Khan, go to the show notes to click on some of the TED Talks that he has done. And here's what Paco J. Palmer, somebody that I'm really inspired about teaching, would say. Tips, tricks, and techniques are not at the heart of education. Fire is. Not merely the facts, not merely the theories, but a deep knowing of what it means to kindle the gift of life in ourselves, in others, and in the world. So coming closer back to home ground. In the field of psychotherapy, the ability to handle a variety of interpersonal, interactional issues is at the heart of clinical expertise. Yet the nature of psychotherapy training lacks specific and individualized learning environments to practice these interpersonal domains. Tim Anderson and colleagues found that facilitative interpersonal skills, or what they call FIS, the ability to perceive, to understand, and communicate that impactfully, accounted for variance of outcomes between therapists, more so than treatment modalities. And in a follow-up study by Tim Anderson and other colleagues, they found similar results. However, the researchers noted that FIS scores before training in a 2-year doctoral program predicted patients' alliance and outcome measures. Intriguingly, the effects of training did not have any effect on outcomes at all. Said another way, a trainee's ability prior to receiving any training matters more than the effects of that 2-year training. So, what does this mean? While this study posed a logical conclusion of how we should think about the selection process of doctoral studies in psychotherapy-related fields such as counseling and psychology programs, another critical piece to consider is what we are doing in training, as there seems to be a lack of evidence of improved outcomes from formalized education in psychotherapy. So now, here's the question. If we are given a chance to reimagine education in psychotherapy, how might it look like? How would we design the learning process? What needs to change and evolve? One last story. This is shared by the good people from the Right Questions Institute in the newsletter. So it says, this spring, a science teacher shared what happened when she used the right question technique with students facing various challenges to keeping them motivated to learn. To introduce a lesson on nuclear chemistry, she showed her class a 7-second video. Get this, 7-second video about the 1986 Chernobyl disaster. The students had never heard of Chernobyl. They didn't know what a Geiger counter was. They wondered why an event from 33 years ago still mattered. They were mesmerized. They had questions. They began searching for answers, even watching a documentary about Chernobyl during their own free time. The teacher wrote, "They came to my class last week and told me the only reason they had come to school that day was because of my class. I cannot begin to express in words what that meant to me." Think what it means to those students. This is just one example of how our work leads to students getting excited about learning. Kindle the flame. Kindle the flame with our questions. These questions put learners on a quest to figure stuff out, a quest to think deeply and become a deep learner. So here's my suggestion to educators in this field. I have 3 points. The first, ignite with the music of therapy. Get students involved into the jam, into the improvisational nature of therapy as early as possible, actively and early as possible, even right down from the undergrad days. Number 2, design psychotherapy classrooms to become more like a social experiment lab and less of a lecture. Get students into the play and experiment in the heat of the action. Then, number 3, teach them the theories. After the action, teach them how to evaluate what went on, how to study the process of therapy and outcomes of therapy.
Frontiers Radio.
Thank you for listening to Frontiers Radio. If you like this podcast, don't forget to subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcasts on. And also, don't forget to spread the love and share with colleagues in the helping profession. Thanks for listening.